So today we're going to be talking about Genshin Impact. That's right, that game that gets trending on Twitter every 5 seconds. And I enjoyed it at one point as well. I have a lot to say about this game, so let's get right into it by explaining how exactly I got into the game in the first place. I'm not going to be going into too much detail about how certain mechanics work in this game, so if you get confused in certain parts of this video, I'm sorry. But hopefully you can follow on with what I'm talking about. Before I got into this game, I was firmly against free-to-play gacha games. I thought they were very predatory in nature and limited how much fun you could have with the game without spending an arm and a leg. I hated how these systems worked, and I didn't want to support companies that did it. Microsoft, please don't release a Xenoblade gacha game, because I'll probably play it. Even though I hated the business practices most free-to-play games used, I still decided to give Genshin Impact a try. Why? Because this game was compared to Breath of the Wild a lot, and I liked that game. The combat seemed solid, the game looked nice, it seemed appealing to me despite it being a free-to-play game, and on top of that, some of my friends at the time were getting into the game as well. So I just had to check this game out. And in mid-October of 2020, I started Genshin Impact. My first few weeks playing this game was spent mostly running around Mondstadt just exploring, and occasionally fighting monsters. I didn't pay much attention to the story at first, I was mainly just getting a feel for the gameplay. I also didn't mess with the gacha system too much. On the beginner's wish though, I got Noelle and Fischl, two decent beginner characters I would end up using for a long time, especially Fischl. And throughout the rest of 2020, I'd spend at least a few hours every day playing Genshin Impact. Needless to say, I was addicted. The exploration was really fun, the combat was simplistic but done well, and the game looked amazing. The characters were charming, and the story, while nothing amazing, did an alright job of keeping me interested initially. For a free-to-play game, this was probably one of the best ones out there, at least in my mind. I don't typically play these kind of games, so I wouldn't really know what other free-to-play games are like, so take that with a grain of salt. Anyways, discovering Liyue for the first time with friends was an amazing experience. That location looked so pretty, and it was worth the journey to get there. Some of the best parts about Genshin Impact is finding new places that just look amazing. In December, I started doing some grinding because I was running out of things to do, unfortunately. And grinding in this game is almost never ending, and is absolutely painful, especially since you can't even grind very much each day due to the resin system, which only gives you so much resin each day, which is consumed every time you go to a dungeon to grind for materials needed to level up characters, artifacts, weapons, and talents. But before we get to that, oh, and of course, I did my daily quests for like 6 months straight. Let's talk about versions first. Around when I started grinding, they introduced Dragon Spine in version 1.2. One of my favorite areas from when I played in Genshin Impact. The atmosphere, combined with the fantastic music and tons of hidden areas to discover, made this place tons of fun to go through. I spent at least 2 weeks just trying to do everything I could there, and it was a blast. Not only that, but this was around the time I got my first 5-star character. Completely out of nowhere. I did a single roll on the standard wish banner. I got Jean, which I ended up using as my main healer for like the rest of the game. Most limited time 5-star characters so far didn't interest me that much until Ganyu's banner came. I saved up a lot of Prima Gems and I still didn't get her, so I caved in and spent like $20 to get her. Despite how silly that sounds, I still stand by this decision. Ganyu was just too good to pass up on. Like, come on, can you really blame me?
Please don't touch my horns.
Oh, and how could I forget? Hu Tao, my beloved. After that came version 1.3. This version is the Liyue Lantern Festival event, where you did a ton of boring fetch quests and a somewhat interesting tower defense game. It was painful and boring. Version 1.4 was basically just Mondstadt Festival thing, and it was basically the same thing but slightly better. After that, I can't even remember what came afterwards. There was an update where you would control a boat and go to a series of islands, which was kind of neat. And there was also an update where you could build your own like house, and that was kind of fun. But then version 2.0 came out, and there it was, finally, a new region to explore, Inazuma, which I never played much of because of how much I burned myself out on this game. Yeah, let's get to that. When I wasn't playing around with whatever new content was in the newest updates in the game, I was completing character story quests, main story quests, or character hangouts, and if I wasn't doing any of that, I was grinding to make my characters stronger. I spent probably most of my playtime grinding in this game, and considering how much grinding is required in order to get a character to max level, and with decent artifacts and talents, it's absolutely dreadful. Genshin Impact is weird. It values your time by limiting how much grinding you can do per day, but at the same time, if you have enough time to do lots of grinding on any given day, you can't really do it much, at least without spending a lot of fragile resin. What makes the daily grind so painful is how you can often get very unlucky since there are so many variables in what makes a good artifact, for example. It can take weeks to get the artifacts you want. It's not a fun process since every day you need to do the exact same domain multiple times. It gets stale pretty quickly, and is largely unsatisfying because of how long it can take to do this. The end game of Genshin Impact, in terms of combat progression, is not worth playing, straight up. Even though I hated the grind, it's almost like this game became a sunk cost. I already spent some money on the game, not just on Ganyu, but I also bought 2 battle passes and Blessing of the Welkin Moon. At this point, I couldn't get myself to stop playing since I sunk so much time and some of my money into this game. Until eventually, I just completely lost interest in playing the game. It got to a point where I lost all enjoyment out of playing it, because of all the grinding I was doing. Even when Inazuma came out, the new region I was so hyped about exploring, I just couldn't bring myself to enjoy it since this game burnt me out so badly on the grinding. As for the story got more interesting as more main story quests came out, but it never really pulled me in like other RPGs have done in the past. I know the game has some cool lore, and some people swear by this game's story, probably because they don't want to feel bad about the sunk cost, but I just don't think it's that interesting. Not to mention, I generally am not a huge fan of silent protagonists. I don't care for self-inserting myself into this game's world. I want a protagonist that has a personality. Paimon, this little fairy companion thing, is who talks for you instead of you doing the talking, and it's painful. Paimon is so incredibly unfunny and has such terrible dialogue that by Inazuma, I was often wondering why I was even playing this game. The main reason a lot of people, including myself, got into this game in the first place was because of the character designs. A lot of them look very appealing to a lot of people. It is how they make money after all, even if MiHoYo puts out a lackluster update, as long as there is a new hot character to get excited about, people couldn't care less. Look, I know I've been fairly negative towards this game at this point, and if you like this game, that's genuinely awesome. No, seriously, It's cool that you managed to continue to find enjoyment in this game that I can no longer get enjoyment out of, especially if you've been playing this game since launch. At the end of the day, though, this is simply my opinion on the game, and personally, if I'm gonna play another RPG that requires a massive time sink, I'm probably gonna go for Final Fantasy XIV, since most of my friends play that game nowadays. I've heard the story is actually very good, so I'm a lot more interested in that game than ever touching Genshin Impact again. If I do eventually play Final Fantasy XIV, I'll be sure to create a review of that game too. Can't tell you when that'll happen though. Thank you for watching the video. If you have any thoughts on Genshin Impact you would like to share in the comments down below, be sure to do so. Also, be sure to subscribe and like the video as it helps me out a ton. Anyways, have a good day. My only regret in Genshin Impact is that I never got Mona. Like, I'm sad I never got her. She's freaking awesome, but like, I never got her, and it makes me sad, man. Like, they couldn't even do that for me. They couldn't even do that for me. Wow. Worst game ever, I swear.